Every morning, a widowed father prepared a special breakfast for a lonely old man, asking nothing in return. What he didn't know was that this simple act of kindness would change his destiny forever. Until one day, 4 bodyguards and 2 lawyers showed up. Dawn had barely painted the rooftops of downtown Portland pink when James Mitchell was already standing behind the glass display case at the Corner Cup Cafe, located in the heart of the historic district. The aroma of freshly ground coffee floated through the air, and the iron and wooden chairs arranged on the sidewalk creaked softly as the first pedestrians passed by. Life was beginning its familiar rhythm. James had learned in the 7 years since he became a widower that mornings were a refuge for him, for his 7-year-old daughter Emma Mitchell, and for that silent ritual he shared with a man whose gaze was tired but dignified, Mr. Thomas Bennett. Every day, at 7 o'clock sharp, Mr. Thomas received his breakfast at no cost: a cup of black coffee piping hot, a glass of freshly squeezed orange juice, and a sweet roll, the one James knew he preferred, a large, generous bear claw. It had been this way for 3 years. No bill, no explicit questions, just the kind gesture of a widowed server who understood that someone needed companionship. James, though he carried the weight of daily routine and the responsibility of raising Emma alone, found something more than an act of charity in that breakfast. It was a moment of connection. Mr. Thomas spoke little, almost nothing. His gaze calmly explored the folded newspaper, then rested on the window where he could see the bustle of downtown, street vendors, cars stopping at the traffic light, distant bells from the cathedral that watched over Pioneer Square. Every morning, James greeted his little girl with a kiss on the forehead before leaving for the cafe, and as soon as the clock struck 7, he raised the security gate, swept the sidewalk, and turned on the lights. Then he prepared Mr. Thomas's table with a carefully tended white tablecloth, served the coffee, the glass of juice, and the large bear claw that he already knew as the usual. He didn't charge. He didn't demand. Beneath the kind smile lay many things: dignity, respect, recognition that in this world not all visible gestures do justice to hidden pain. That morning, however, took an unexpected turn. James arrived as usual, found Emma already eating something quick at home before accompanying him, and opened the cafe door to let in a light, fresh breeze. He placed the silver spoons, arranged the sugar and cream, and just as he was putting the large bear claw in the oven to warm it, he heard a strange murmur on the sidewalk. Hurried footsteps, murmurs in dark suits, a slight jingling of briefcases. He looked up and on the other side of the display case saw the figures of 4 tall, burly men dressed in black suits, white shirts, and dark ties, the bodyguards, and behind them 2 lawyers with brown leather folders and steady gazes. The routine stopped. The first customers hesitated, lowered their newspapers. The silence stretched out. James left the bear claw on the tray and went out front. Both lawyers introduced themselves with names he didn't manage to retain at that moment. They asked for Mr. Thomas. "Is Mr. Thomas Bennett here?" one of them asked in a soft but authoritative voice. James pointed to the old man. He was at his table, cup of coffee in hand, the newspaper folded in his lap, as always. The lawyers approached. One spoke. "Mr. Bennett, we've been sent by your family. You've been alone too long. We want to take you to your home where you should be." The tone wasn't aggressive, but there was urgency. Mr. Thomas lowered the newspaper. Why now? Why this gesture? James watched with a tightening heart. He knew the man's loneliness, the daily refuge that was this cafe, the secret that seemed to have been built without words. Mr. Thomas looked up, met James's eyes, and then closed his eyes for a second. "I don't need it," he said in a barely audible voice. The lawyer repeated, "Your family, your children, have decided it's time to return. We've handled all the arrangements." Mr. Thomas stood up with effort, leaning on his wooden cane, and said something that froze the atmosphere. "I'll only stay if he, James, remains by my side, because he's been the only one who treated me like a human being." The phrase resonated powerfully. The bodyguards exchanged glances. The lawyers leaned in slightly. James felt his face flush. a tacit affirmation of everything they had shared in silence: dignity, respect, humanity. It wasn't a simple favor. There was something deeper. In that instant, one of the lawyers slid a folder onto James's table. It was an act as subtle as it was decisive. He opened the folder with slightly trembling hands, not from fear, but from a discovery he didn't expect. There he found the proposal: move with Mr. Thomas and Emma to an estate in West Lynne, an elegant place away from the bustle of downtown. A good salary, separate living quarters, the old man's companionship. At the same time, Mr. Thomas's children, Robert Bennett and Margaret Bennett, introduced themselves briefly, with kind faces, without suspicion, without hidden urgency. They wanted to help, they said. Not for the money, they insisted, simply to recover the father they had lost. The café had been suspended in time. The murmurs had ceased. The city continued its rhythm outside: vendors, cars, distant bells. But inside the establishment, something had changed forever. James looked at Emma, who watched with wide eyes, not fully understanding, but feeling the strange rhythm of the moment. He looked at Mr. Thomas, firm but vulnerable. And for the first time in a long while, he felt that routine was slipping from his hands, that life was asking him for a decision. It was then that he understood that breakfast he served for free every morning was no longer just an act of kindness. It was the beginning of something greater, a bridge to intertwined lives, a change that none of them had seen coming. And as the sun began to filter more strongly through the display case, illuminating the table where the coffee steamed, James felt the vertigo of the unknown. Accept, refuse. What would it mean for him, for Emma, to give up the security of today for the promise of tomorrow? And before there was time to answer, the lawyers added softly, "If you agree, we can prepare everything for you to move next week." The silence settled in again. Eyes met. The sugar remained untouched in its bowl. The faithful glass of juice remained silent. That normal morning, like so many others, no longer was. And so at the Corner Cup Café, as Portland awakened with its distant noise, a new journey began for James, for Emma, and for Mr. Thomas. A journey where the eternal breakfast would open the door to a destiny that none of them had imagined. The sun beat down hard on the road to West Lynne, and James's old sedan slowly advanced between the trees that bordered the road. Emma, in the back seat, had her nose pressed against the window, fascinated by the open fields, the old stone fences, and the clear sky that seemed to embrace everything. James, for his part, drove in silence, with tense hands on the steering wheel. He couldn't stop thinking about whether he was doing the right thing. Beside him, in the passenger seat, Mr. Thomas Bennett looked ahead, with an expression that mixed melancholy and resignation. Although he said nothing, James felt the internal battle being waged within the old man. Returning to the estate after so many years wasn't an easy decision, even less so when that same land had witnessed his love, his loss, and the break with his children. The entrance to the Bennett estate appeared between the trees like an ancient sigh. The wrought iron gates opened automatically, revealing a stone path flanked by towering trees and neglected but still majestic gardens. In the background, the main house stood with elegance, a colonial-style construction with white walls, arches, wooden balconies, and red tiles, imposing but sad. "Dad, look!" Emma shouted from the back, pointing to a pair of horses in a small paddock. "There are horses!" James barely smiled. It had been a long time since he'd seen his daughter so excited about something. Upon reaching the house's portico, they were greeted by Margaret Bennett, a woman with light brown hair and a kind face, who approached with a serene smile. "Welcome," she said, looking at Mr. Thomas with a mixture of nostalgia and tenderness. Behind her appeared Robert Bennett, more serious, with rolled-up sleeves and a reserved expression. He shook hands with James and then leaned toward Emma with a contained smile. "Nice to meet you. You must be Emma," he said gently. The girl nodded shyly, hugging her father's leg. They entered the estate. The interior was elegant, but the absence of life was evident. Furniture covered with blankets, dusty paintings, windows closed for too long. The house was beautiful, yes, but it seemed asleep. James felt it immediately. This place needed laughter, footsteps, air. During the visit, Margaret led them through the gardens, the main dining room, the library, and the guest rooms. Emma ran everywhere, touching flowers, chasing butterflies, and occasionally returning to take Mr. Thomas's hand, who watched her with a weak smile, as if he couldn't remember the last time a child had spoken to him with such confidence. "Can I stay here with you, Grandpa?" Emma asked fearlessly, upon reaching a small terrace overlooking a pond. The word hit him hard. Grandpa. No one had ever called him that. Mr. Thomas swallowed hard and stroked her hair. "Of course, sweetheart," he said with a broken voice. "I'd love that." James witnessed all of this with a tightening heart. He had accepted the visit so that Emma could see the place, to fulfill the courtesy. But in that moment he knew he could no longer say no. His daughter had found something in that place, something he couldn't buy or plan, belonging. That night, as they said goodbye at the entrance, Margaret offered them to stay for dinner. But James thanked her and promised he would respond soon. Already in the car, Emma only spoke once before falling asleep. "Dad, can we live with Grandpa?" He didn't respond, but his heart had already decided. A week later, they moved in. The estate changed immediately. Emma filled the hallways with laughter, the walls of the room with drawings, the breakfasts with stories. James received a comfortable room in a small cottage at the back of the property, with his own kitchen and enough space to live with dignity. Mr. Thomas, for his part, seemed to be reborn little by little. He was still tired, yes, but more present. He listened to Emma patiently, taught her to recognize trees, told her anecdotes about the countryside. James, however, didn't completely lower his guard. He watched Robert and Margaret carefully. He expected to find in them some sign of hypocrisy, some hidden interest. But he didn't. Margaret offered to help with Emma's school, brought her books, accompanied her to the garden. Robert worked from a small office, and every so often sat down to eat with them, without imposing, without pretending. One afternoon, James sat with Mr. Thomas under a jacaranda tree. The old man watched the purple flowers fall onto the lawn. "Why were you living in such a sad boarding house, having this estate?" James finally asked. Mr. Thomas took a deep breath before responding. "Because I felt empty," he said. "I lost my wife, Emily, more than 10 years ago. When she died, I began to close myself off. My children tried to get close, but I no longer had a soul to give, and pride, that damned pride ate me from the inside. I distanced myself. I became a bitter old man, until I got to that boarding house. I wanted to punish myself, I suppose." James nodded in silence. "But you," Mr. Thomas continued, "you looked at me without pity, just with humanity. And your daughter, she gave me a new name, one I never had. Grandpa." Nothing more needed to be said. One day, while organizing books in the library, James found an old wooden box. Inside, among letters, photos, and yellowed postcards, he found an unopened letter in an envelope with delicate feminine handwriting. The addressee said Robert and Margaret. The date was from more than 10 years ago. The sender, Emily Bennett. James hesitated to open it, but something told him he shouldn't keep this concern to himself. He carefully broke the seal. The paper smelled of frozen time. "My loves, I know your father is hardened. I know he didn't always know how to love you, but he loves you. Please don't forget. Don't let his silence make you doubt his heart. He's not perfect, but he's good. Bring him back home someday. He needs it, even if he doesn't know how to say it." James felt a lump in his throat. He put the letter back, but something inside him had ignited. Perhaps this letter was the key everyone needed. Perhaps not only Mr. Thomas deserved a second chance. And in the garden, Emma continued playing with a colored ribbon, while Mr. Thomas, seated in his wicker chair, watched her with eyes full of life that, until recently, were completely extinguished. The air at the estate was beginning to change. The mornings were no longer marked by the echo of silence, but by Emma's soft laughter running through the hallways, James's footsteps preparing coffee, and the increasingly frequent greetings between Mr. Thomas and his children. Although the relationship remained tense, the presence of the little girl and James's simple warmth seemed to have opened a small crack in the wall of lost years. Robert Bennett was a man of structure, a planner, calculating, not given to emotions. But in recent weeks he could be seen observing more than speaking. He looked at his father with a mixture of resentment and nostalgia, as if he wanted to say many things but didn't know where to start. Margaret, on the other hand, was the complete opposite. Emotional, direct, sometimes impulsive, but genuine. She had tried to approach Mr. Thomas several times without knowing how to heal the past. It was one night after a simple dinner on the terrace that everything exploded. The sky was starry, the breeze gentle, and the four adults were sitting in silence while Emma slept, hugging a rag doll on the wicker sofa. James was bringing an herbal tea when he heard Margaret's voice, broken, emerge like a whisper laden with years of containment. "Why did you leave, Dad?" Robert lowered his gaze. Mr. Thomas didn't respond immediately. Margaret insisted. "Why did you leave us alone when Mum died? Why didn't you call us? Why did you act like we didn't exist?" Mr. Thomas swallowed hard. He looked at his children, then at James, who remained motionless, cup in hand. "Because I didn't know how to go on," he finally replied. "Because every corner of this house reminded me of her, because it hurt me to be here, and it hurt me more to look at you and see in your eyes the same pain I felt." Robert spoke for the first time with a low but firm voice. "You needed us, but you never said it. And we needed you too, but we weren't going to beg you." "I know," Mr. Thomas admitted. "I was wrong. My pride was stronger than my love. I hid in my solitude, believing it would hurt less that way. But it hurt more, much more." Silence fell like a shadow. James seized the moment. He took out the letter he had carefully kept since that day in the library. He placed it on the table between everyone. "There's something you need to read," he said. Margaret took it. Her eyes widened upon seeing the handwriting. Robert leaned in, recognizing the writing too. "Is it from Mom?" he asked with a thread of voice. James nodded. They read it in silence. Emily's words were soft, full of love, understanding, and a clarity that pierced through the years. Margaret cried silently. Robert closed his eyes. Mr. Thomas remained with his gaze fixed on the table. When they finished, there were no reproaches, only a long embrace, first between the siblings and then between Margaret and her father. Robert hesitated, but finally approached too. James, discreetly, took the empty cups and carried them to the kitchen, letting the family reconstruct itself in its own time. In the following weeks, something awakened at the estate. There were movie nights in the old living room, cooking afternoons as a family, games in the garden with Emma, and even a birthday celebrated with homemade cake, balloons, and country music. The estate was coming back to life. Mr. Thomas began to walk more, to laugh more. James became his kind shadow, his friend, his confidant. Margaret and Robert also began to participate actively. It was as if little by little everyone remembered that blood isn't enough, that love must be worked on, cared for, rescued if necessary. One afternoon, while walking through the corridor of the main house, Mr. Thomas spoke to James with a different seriousness. "I'm going to change the will." James looked at him, surprised. "I want Robert and Margaret to receive what they deserve, but you and your daughter too. Emma gave me back meaning. You gave me back dignity. You are family. And family isn't always born. Sometimes it's chosen." "Mr. Thomas, no, I couldn't accept that," James replied. "You've already given us so much. A home, security." "It's not about money," the old man interrupted him. "It's about justice, about love. I want you to accept it, not as a debt, but as a legacy." James didn't insist. He just nodded, moved to his core, but the joy wouldn't be eternal. One morning, while playing in the garden, Emma came running to James with a furrowed brow. "Dad, Grandpa gets tired more. He doesn't want to play with me as much anymore." James looked at her, worried. "Did he say something? Does something hurt?" "No, but when he gets up, he holds on tight to the armrest, like it's hard for him. And when I told him a joke, he didn't laugh like before." James began to observe more closely. Mr. Thomas sat more often. His steps were slower, his laughter less sonorous. He didn't complain, but his body was beginning to show signs that he, out of pride or fear, didn't admit. And although the estate shone with new life, a discreet shadow began to slip between its walls, a shadow that announced that time, always silent, forgives not even the strongest hearts. James knew it that afternoon when he saw Mr. Thomas fall asleep in the porch chair with a serene but paler face while the wind played with the jacaranda leaves around him. The end was approaching, though no one said it yet. The days at the estate began to run at a slower pace, almost as if time itself knew it should walk carefully. The weather was warm, the sky clearer than ever, and the sunsets became longer, as if they wanted to stretch out to embrace Mr. Thomas a little more. He no longer went out to the garden as much. He preferred to stay in his favorite armchair by the dining room window, where the morning sun entered gently, and the breeze brought the perfume of jacarandas. There Emma used to sit beside him with a book, a drawing, or simply to hold his hand. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they didn't, but the silence between them had more meaning than many words. James observed everything with a mixture of gratitude and sadness. He knew that time with Mr. Thomas was running out, but he also knew that the important thing had already happened. The old man wouldn't die alone. He would die in peace, surrounded by love. And that changed everything. One early morning, while the sky still had violet tones, James got up as always to prepare breakfast. The ritual was already part of him. Hot coffee, sweet roll, freshly squeezed orange juice. Everything the same as always. Everything as it should be. When he entered the dining room, he found Emma asleep, curled up next to Mr. Thomas's lap. The old man had a serene expression, his head slightly tilted toward her. The steam from the coffee James was carrying on the tray stood still in the air. The silence was total, and in that silence James knew. He approached calmly without disturbing the girl. He put a hand on Mr. Thomas's shoulder and confirmed it. He was no longer breathing. His face was a photograph of absolute peace, a farewell without words. James knelt before him. He didn't cry immediately. He just closed his eyes and gave thanks in silence. He thanked him for the shared breakfasts, for the trust, for the family they built from emotional ruins. He thanked him for the life that flourished when everything seemed withered. Shortly after, Margaret and Robert arrived. No one shouted. No one made scenes. There were tears, yes, many. But there were also long hugs, knowing looks, intertwined hands, a dignified farewell, a departure surrounded by love. Days later, gathered in the library, the family's lawyer read the will. Mr. Thomas Bennet has left by explicit will the Bennet estate as shared property among his children, Robert and Margaret Bennet, and his chosen family, James Mitchell and his daughter Emma. No one opposed, no one argued. Robert nodded serenely. Margaret smiled with shining eyes. James, with a broken voice, could only say, "We don't deserve it." "You deserve it more than you think," Robert said, looking him in the eyes. "Thank you for giving us back our father." Months passed, then years. The estate stopped being a sad place. It became a true home. Margaret restored part of the library and opened a small cultural centre in honour of her mother. Robert, with James's support, cultivated part of the land for organic production and opened job opportunities in the area. James became the operational heart of the place, but beyond that, he was the soul that kept everyone together. Emma grew up surrounded by love. She had the firm affection of her father, the protective care of Margaret, the teachings of Robert, and the constant memory of her grandpa, whose chair still remained on the main terrace, always with fresh flowers beside it. But there was something more. Every morning, without fail, James prepared breakfast exactly as he had done for years. Black coffee, orange juice, a sweet bear claw. He placed it on the table where Mr. Thomas used to sit. He never said anything. He just left it there as a ritual, as an act of love that transcended death. Emma, now a little older, approached him one morning while he was serving the coffee. "Why do you keep doing that, Dad?" James looked at her with a soft smile, stroked her hair and replied, "Because there are things that shouldn't be forgotten, sweetheart." The girl looked at the table, then at her dad. "What if someone eats it?" "That breakfast is for whoever knows how to see the invisible," he replied. "For whoever understands that there are loves that never leave." And then, as the sun came through the window and bathed the table in golden light, James took a seat next to his daughter, looked toward the empty place in front of him, and, with a calm voice, said, "Never forget that a simple act of kindness can change everything." The imaginary camera pulls away. The estate looks calm. In the air, the aroma of coffee floats with the warmth of an eternal memory. And so, with a table set and hearts healed, ended the longest, most important, most human breakfast anyone has ever shared.